On this week's show, we've something completely different. We're showing the online premiere of a documentary we've made on destructive invasive species. It's an issue that affects all of us anglers, and we can play our part in the battle against the spread of these aliens. Disinfecting our nets and our boots before and after we visit waters is the only way we anglers can stop the spread of these seeds to new waters. Virkon is the recommended disinfectant, and if you Google it, you'll be able to find your local supplier. Now next week, we have our Christmas special. We'll be having lots of fun and Christmas crackers. We'll be announcing the winner of our pixelated photo competition, and it's your last chance for 2014 to be in with an opportunity to win some great prizes. So go to Talk.TV to upload your photos. We hope the film will inspire you to play your part in preventing the spread of these dangerous aliens. An invasive species is an introduced plant that is not native to a specific location. Because invasives have no natural enemies or competitors, they can destroy the native plant populations, threaten the natural balance of the ecosystem, human health and the human economy. In Northern Ireland, Queen's University Belfast became aware of infestations of invasive species on a number of river catchments in Ulster. They set up a project to tackle this problem.
So we have a project that's called CIRB, which is C-I-R-B, controlling invasive riparian plants to restore native biodiversity. So that's why we just call it CIRB for short. This project arose from a project that we were doing on invasive species in Ireland. And we were looking at policy and legislation and trying to bring in ways of dealing with it, but there was no practical element to that project, Invasive Species Ireland. And then we became aware that there was European money for actually practical work that would deliver the objectives of actually controlling it. So we set about devising a large project that would take place within this kind of funding stream, which is called Interreg. It's a cross-border cooperation programme.
In the spring of 2011, Queen's University Belfast commenced the CIRB project for the control of 4 particularly destructive invasive plants: giant hogweed, rhododendron ponticum, Himalayan balsam and Japanese knotweed. CIRB is a large project involving 8 participating bodies, focusing on 28 cross-border river catchments in Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland and Scotland. To date, CIRB is the largest multi-agency project undertaken in Europe to control invasive plants.
We started off the project with Inland Fisheries Ireland from the south of Ireland, whom we were already collaborating with because they're very interested in waterways and invasive species. And then shortly into the development of our project, we were contacted by the Rivers and Fisheries Trust from Scotland, who also have a very big problem with invasive species, and they wanted to get involved. And this funding stream for the first time was involving Scotland as well, so we thought it was very advantageous to bring in the best practice from Scotland along with what we were doing in Ireland, and we thought this would actually make a really big difference to controlling invasives in cross-border areas. When we looked around, things like the paths anglers take when they're going fishing in the rivers, those were completely blocked with a very dangerous species called the giant hogweed. The reason it's dangerous is that it exudes a sap, and that sap will burn. And the burns can actually be very, very serious, particularly for children. So looking at where even it was growing up, perhaps in children's playgrounds, blocking the amenity value of rivers and spreading more and more, we felt that it was absolutely necessary to get out there and try to do something about it.
The rivers Glyde and Dee, which form part of the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, had a serious infestation of giant hogweed, which cut off access for angling and recreational activities along these 2 important salmonid rivers.
This project was really good in that for the first time we were tackling the species head on a catchment level, which I think is very, very important. Whereas before, a lot of projects they looked at certain areas, maybe it's a protected habitat, but again they're looking at small restricted areas. So we were looking at a catchment scale, so we had to kind of think a little bit outside the box and exactly how we were going to tackle this. In terms of the resources that we used, there was nothing really innovative or anything new. I mean, we had good information already on exactly how to deal with this problem, the type of chemical to use, the type of equipment that we wanted to use. Now obviously we learnt a lot of information on the way, in terms of dosage, in terms of how we approach it, in terms of what type of equipment is best for the terrain that we're on, and things like that. Well, I actually remember my first site visit down to where we were actually going to be working, and I was just met by it's like a jungle of hogweed, and it was pretty daunting at that stage. So we kind of got a bit of an impression of what the scale of the job was going to be. So we got good information from the inland fisheries guys who work along the river almost every day, so they were able to pinpoint exactly where they'd found some of these invasives. So we used that as a starting point, as a basis, and from there we did a kind of a thorough survey of the river to look at what exactly was the extent of the problem. Now we were quite lucky with the day in the glide because although there was a lot of hogweed on the river, it was very much contained to a small area, so we're talking maybe within 4 or 5 kilometres, which is fairly manageable.
A call for stakeholders and other interested parties to get involved in CURB was publicised. The Inland Waterways Association of Ireland responded enthusiastically. They offered volunteers willing to help with the control of a significant giant hogweed infestation along the banks of the Newry Canal.
And we saw that the hogweed was a severe problem, especially along the banks of the canal. It was encroaching on the amenity value of the towpath that's been built here and on the canal itself, and we put volunteers forwards to get training. Well, we've covered in the region of about 4 miles between the canal and the feeder rivers, and about 150 metres each side to make sure, because this stuff spreads, so you have to eradicate it from a large area. And we this year can finally see that we're getting on top of it. The first year we seemed to do it. The next year, very disheartening. There seems to be just as much as the previous year. The year after that it starts to decrease, and this year now we can see, well, we spent more time walking with the backpacks on than we did actually spraying, so that's a good sign. The volunteers do go up and down the towpath all the time and in the area, and if they see a bit of hogweed that we've missed, out they get, they have a sprayer with them, small one, spray it, get it killed, because you have to attack it like that, relentlessly. You cannot let one head get to seed. It's a disaster if you do, and you may as well just pack up and go home. And we feel we are getting on top of it. As far as we could envisage along the canal, we've had no seeding plants this year, whatever.
On this particular catchment, I would say excellent. There's been a very noticeable improvement from the way it was to how it looks now. I mean, it's absolutely wonderful to go back in to the same woodland that I stepped into 4 years ago and hardly see, a hogweed plant. I really have to search down into the vegetation to try and find one, which is absolutely amazing. Because 4 years ago, whenever I stepped into this woodland, I mean, I wasn't able to walk through it. That's kind of how bad it was. So from that point of view, it's great to see the effort that we made, all that hard work, it's all paid off now. It's looking fantastic, the walkers are back, the anglers are back, they're delighted, and people are using the river again. The flora, the semi-natural flora is coming back, it's fantastic to see all that, because it's a beautiful area, it's got some beautiful, the biodiversity here is absolutely fantastic, so it's great that we've done this, great that we've brought this resource back to the people, but it's also brought it back to nature as well. So it's been fantastic.
The CURB project management chose the Faughan River catchment, which straddles the borders of Donegal and Derry-Londonderry, because of heavy infestations of Himalayan balsam and Japanese knotweed, which have displaced the diverse range of native plants, resulting in monoculture colonies of these two destructive aliens. Japanese knotweed has the ability to grow through hard surfaces, causing structural damage to buildings, bridges and flood defences.
The fawn here predominantly is knotweed and Himalayan balsam, although we do have a few hogweed plants a bit further up in the catchment. But here it's predominantly knotweed. I mean, this area here alone, there's about, I think it's about 2.5 kilometres of solid knotweed. With the whole of the fawn being designated as an ASSI, they're very specific about what chemicals we could use. So we knew from the start it would be a glyphosate-based formula, specifically the Roundup Pro-Bioactive, because it's approved for use near waterways. So we knew it was going to be a spraying strategy. Over the years we've figured out a sort of best practice management. Some people would recommend a two-stage attack where you sort of spray it earlier in the year and then hit it later in the year, but we found that it's better to wait until later in the year and just give it one big blast of the stuff, because if you wait until it's dying off for the winter time, there's a much better uptake. It takes the stuff right down into the root, and with it being a systemic herbicide, that's how it works. It works a lot better. If you hit it earlier in the year, it does kind of wound it, but then whenever you go to spray it again at the end of the year, the whole cycle within the plant isn't as efficient, so it doesn't take it down into the root as it should. We knew that Japanese knotweed was the dominant invader on this particular catchment, but secondary to that was the Himalayan balsam. Now it covers roughly the same amount of the river as the knotweed, so approximately about 20 kilometres or so, but further upstream it's a lot more sparse. Now there's two approaches to Himalayan balsam. For the bigger stands where it's really prevalent, we would spray it. It works really well, it kills the plant, but then the issue is with the seed bank that's left behind. So we're finding now that it requires at least, well, if we can, 2 treatments, because as soon as you knock back the first layer of balsam, it lets the light down to penetrate, and the seeds, there's a second sort of batch comes up straight away. In areas that are less highly invaded, it's very shallow rooted, so you can find, I mean, if you give it a good touch, it pulls it out of the ground. Now we have had a couple of community events where we call balsam bashing. We've had a few sort of local volunteers, we've had some people down from a local hotel. We come out, sort of tell them a bit about, you know, the plant, about the project, and then get them out and have a go, get their hands dirty and clear a bit of an area.
Spraying invasive species reduces the spread of the infestation. However, the successful control or even eradication of these aliens is a long-term process. Stakeholders play an important role in the ongoing efforts to deal with invasives. In the Faughan Valley catchment, there were 2 prominent agencies involved: the Faughan Valley Landscape Partnership and the Lochs Agency.
The River Faughan is a hugely important river for recreational angling. As I said, it's on the banks, or it's adjacent to the large Connor Basin that's Derry, Londonderry. So people visiting this area may well decide to go and fish the local rivers, etc. So we see it as a very important component of the local rural economy. The partnership aspect of CURB was really important. Pre-CURB, one of the reasons why the River Faughan was chosen was that the Lochs Agency had conducted a baseline invasive species survey on it. So CURB could hit the ground running within this catchment. They didn't have to go and complete a full catchment baseline survey. So the Lochs Agency brought that to the table to begin with, and we would like to think that that helped direct the choice of this river. We've also had a number of staff that have been trained with the relevant skills and obtaining the relevant permits to use pesticides and herbicides adjacent to watercourses. Big gains have been made on the River Faughan in terms of treating the invasive species. The view behind me has really opened up. There aren't the same monoculture, large stands of single species, or maybe 2 species at the most. There's a greater diversity to the environment. Light's able to penetrate you know, down through the riverbank into the actual river to increase plant growth and invertebrate growth, which in turn the fish can feed off. So there's a great improvement to this section of the River Faughan as a result of the CURB project.
The Faughan Valley Landscape Partnership is a collaboration between Rapid, Derry City Council and the Woodland Trust. One of its objectives is to conserve and restore priority habitats and associated priority species.
I work with the general public. We recruit volunteers to do a number of different heritage activities within the Faughan Valley, and one of these then we were able to offer is for people to help to deal with invasive species, and we did that with CURB, and CURB would come in and with our volunteers they trained them, raised awareness of what the invasive species were, how to identify them, and then how to deal with the chemicals and how to spray, and then onto where volunteers are actually going through accredited you know, PA6 insecticide courses and things like that. So this project has enabled us to reduce that risk of the invasive species taking a hold, and it's using a whole river catchment to deal with the invasive species, which is the only way to do it, because otherwise they'll just come back and come back and come back. So we're very fortunate that this was happening on the Faughan. So it really complemented a lot of access projects. We were putting in paths, we were trying to encourage community involvement and community engagement and use of the river, so it complemented our project perfectly.
spraying and stakeholder involvement are essential elements in the control of invasive species. However, it is equally important to prevent colonisation of new areas.
Biosecurity is a concept whereby if you have managed, for example, to control an invasive species within an area, what you need to do is maintain that control so that it doesn't come back. So biosecurity, we're trying to stop things like seeds coming in. Anglers obviously wear boots, they need to wear boots. They often bring in boats if they've got boats. And under the biosecurity measures, you would ensure that boots are cleaned off, and we actually have marketed a little kit so that the anglers can spray their boots with a disinfectant and a scrubbing brush and remove all the seeds. And similarly, boats, there's a campaign called Check, Clean and Dry. And that means that, for example, anglers who are moving between different rivers and lakes, they will actually dry their boat off in between times and kill any aquatic invasive species. So biosecurity means keeping it out when you've got rid of it.
While we know a lot about the effects invasives have on the environment they colonise, little is known about the impact they have on the insects that pollinate native plants. CURB conducted research in this area.
I looked at sites that had the invasive species and also that didn't have the invasive species, so I could compare the two and see if there's any differences. There is a lot of difference across, so I looked at Japanese knotweed, giant hogweed and Himalayan balsam. There's not one sort of across the board answer. It varies a lot. For example, with giant hogweed we find that there's a lot less abundance of pollinators, so hoverflies, bumblebees, solitary bees in invaded sites. So in sort of more natural sites there is a better abundance, whereas with Himalayan balsam it seems to be very, very attractive to bumblebees. However, it may not be quite as good for hoverflies.
In Scotland, the Argyll Fisheries Trust manages catchments totalling 7,000 square kilometres. Here the main invasive is Rhododendron ponticum. In such a huge area, it was not practical to deal with the problem on an entire catchment basis. The strategy here was to concentrate the resources of CURB in an area that would deliver maximum impact. Loch Awe, at 826 square kilometres, is the largest catchment in Argyll. Here, 3 important spawning streams for Loch Awe's brown trout population were identified. Situated on the southeast of the loch, these streams had deteriorated to the point where they no longer supported aquatic life.
In this area, we're in the southeast of Loch Awe just now, and this whole area was basically covered in rhododendron, and with a few trees interspersed. And the area was in danger of becoming a monoculture, where you've just got rhododendron blanketing the whole area. So that was why we got involved in this area, because it was reducing the effectiveness of the streams to produce fish, and that's why the Fisheries Trust is involved. So what we wanted to do was to open up the streams back up to the sunlight, allow the sunlight in, it produces plants, it attracts insects, insects fall into the stream, the fish feed on the insects, and therefore the whole food chain is kick-started and the whole area becomes much more productive. The methodology we used, and this is the accepted rule of thumb within the industry, and the advice that the Forestry Commission gave us, was that anything above hip height you cut, anything below hip height you spray. And that's the methodology that we've carried all the way through the project, and it's been very effective. Certainly we've seen that where the rhododendron has been cut and then the cut stump has actually been treated with a pesticide application, that stopped that stump from regrowing. But you will see other areas popping up as the seeds carpeting this whole area of Rhododendron ponticum, and they'll start to come up over the years to come. And that's why it's incredibly important when you're dealing with rhododendron that it's not just a 2, 3, 4 year programme. You actually need to have a 15-year programme to be effective, to return every single year and spray everything that grows up. Rhododendron will grow, within 3 or 4 years it will only grow a few inches, within 6-7 years it will have grown maybe a foot or so, and then within 20 years it will be 10 feet high. So this is what we're dealing with. That's why it's important to return every single year and to spray the regrowth and make sure that it's knocked back.
The results of this strategy were impressive. The team were surprised at how quickly the productivity of the streams recovered. Surveys showed that brown trout and other species such as salmon were returning and thriving in the 3 rehabilitated streams.
The 3 areas that we've targeted, the treatment has been really successful. Using contractors in the way we have done has dealt with the mature stands of rhododendron, and it's enabled us to go in and clear the areas as far as we can. We will have regrowth coming year on year, but that initial commitment to go in and to treat the mature stands will allow the local landowners to start a programme of treatment that will be far less onerous for them, something that's achievable. They can come in once a year, spray, it would only take a couple of days, and that's something that we'll hope will be taken on into the future. But without having that initial seed money from the Curb project, none of this would have happened. So from our point of view, it's been absolutely fantastic to tackle this problem that's been here for decades. And in a few short years we've managed to really cut back the rhododendron in these key areas for fisheries productivity, and we hope that will, something we can use as a springboard to take us forward into the future.
Over the lifetime of the Curb project, significant advances have been made in the control of invasive species in the areas affected. In Northern Ireland, the impact has been on a full catchment basis, a rare achievement in Europe. The targeted approach in Scotland has revived strategic spawning streams and increased fish productivity. However, invasives are living organisms, and their survival instinct means that given the opportunity, they will thrive and recolonize again. The control of invasive species is an ongoing process. A combination of treatment, stakeholder involvement, advocacy, and biosecurity are required. Persistence is essential if we are to eliminate the threat these invasive species pose to the environments and economies of Europe.
One of the most important things post-project is that we keep the effort up. We know, from various studies and from some of the work and research that we've done, that there is a huge seed bank of this plant still in the soil, and it's going to come up year after year after year. So the danger is, if we stop now and if we didn't do anything for a couple of years, the problem will come back again. I have absolutely no doubt about that. So it's very important that we keep on top of it, that it is controlled year after year, and we try to deplete the seed bank that's there. We've been successful in doing that this past 4 years, and we've seen a noticeable decrease in new plants coming up, and that's extremely important. But we need to keep doing it. We need to keep doing it, and it has to be a long-term thing. We can't just do it this year, not do it next year. That just doesn't work. It has to be done on the long term, and I'm talking 5-10 years, constant effort.
This project is a sentinel project in Ireland and indeed at a European level for the control of invasive riparian species. We have to see what the next stage is. We've shown that big gains can be made within a relatively short period of time. We really need to work on the legacy and to ensure that funding secured to continue this good work if we have any hope to control and potentially eradicate these species in the River Faughan, and indeed within other catchments throughout the island of Ireland, the British Isles and indeed Europe.
What we would like to believe is that keeping it controlled now, in the future, perhaps within the next 5 or so years, 5 years, we will actually be able to have the biological control agent that will finish the job.